What happens when America's most wholesome TV show hides one of Hollywood's coldest feuds? Ron Howard spent years biting his tongue about a co-star who made his childhood a living nightmare. And the shocking part? Millions of viewers had absolutely no idea. Welcome back to the channel. Today, we're pulling back the curtain on one of television's most beloved classics, The Andy Griffith Show. You know it. The charming, small-town setting, the fishing trips, the homemade pies cooling on windowsills. It was pure Americana, the kind of show that made you believe in simpler times and good-hearted people. But here's the truth Hollywood didn't want you to know. Behind those warm smiles and scripted laughs, real tension was brewing. Young Ron Howard, playing the adorable Opie Taylor, wasn't just navigating lines and camera angles. He was dealing with a co-star who made every scene feel like walking on eggshells. And decades later, when he finally opened up about it, the revelations were stunning. So who was this person? What made working with them so unbearable? And how did a show about kindness and community become a masterclass in suppressed conflict? Stick around, because this story gets darker than you'd ever expect from Mayberry. Let's rewind to October 3, 1960. That's when CBS premiered a little sitcom that would go on to define an entire generation's idea of comfort television. The Andy Griffith Show wasn't just popular, it was a cultural phenomenon. Over 8 seasons, it delivered nearly 250 episodes, never once falling below 7th place in the ratings. By its final season, it sat comfortably at number 1, joining an elite club with only I Love Lucy and Seinfeld. The premise was simple but effective. Sheriff Andy Taylor, a widowed lawman, raising his son Opie in the fictional town of Mayberry, North Carolina. The show deliberately evoked a nostalgic 1930s atmosphere, even though it was filmed in the heart of the 1960s. Andy Griffith himself described it as capturing a time gone by, and that's exactly what made it magical. Audiences fell head over heels for the colorful cast of characters. There was Don Knotts as the lovably neurotic deputy Barney Fife, whose comedic timing earned him multiple Emmy Awards. There was the steady moral compass of Sheriff Taylor himself, and of course, there was little Ronnie Howard as Opie, the freckle-faced boy with the bright red hair who could tug at your heartstrings with a single scene. But every family sitcom needs that maternal figure, right? Enter Frances Bavier as Aunt Bee, the kind-hearted, no-nonsense woman who kept the Taylor household running smoothly. She baked pies, dispensed wisdom, and provided the emotional warmth that balanced Andy's calm authority. On paper, she was perfect. On screen, she was beloved. But behind the cameras, that's where the fairy tale started to crumble. Before we dive into the drama, let's talk about who Ron Howard really was, and more importantly, who he became. Born on March 1, 1954, in Duncan, Oklahoma, Ronald William Howard was practically born with a script in his hand. His father, Rance Howard, was an actor and director. His mother, Jean Spiegel Howard, was also in the business. Show business wasn't just a career path for the Howards, it was the family trade. By age 5, Ron was already booking roles. He appeared in The Twilight Zone, Dennis the Menace, and several other popular shows of the era. But everything changed when he auditioned for The Andy Griffith Show. Landing the role of Opie at such a young age could have derailed him. Child stardom has destroyed countless careers and lives. But Ron was different. He's often described his early memories of the set with surprising clarity. One story he loves to tell involves his very first scene, where he had to pretend a toy turtle was dead. He remembers Andy Griffith gently coaching him through it, making the whole experience feel easy and natural. That moment set the tone for what would become an 8-year relationship with one of television's most respected stars. But here's what's fascinating. Even as a kid, Ron was observing. He was watching how directors worked, how scenes were constructed, how stories were told. He wasn't just memorizing lines, he was studying the entire craft. And that curiosity would eventually transform him from America's favorite redhead into one of Hollywood's most successful directors. After The Andy Griffith Show ended, Ron didn't fade into obscurity like so many child actors. Instead, he landed another iconic role, Richie Cunningham on Happy Days. Once again, he played the wholesome, all-American boy, and once again, he was quietly plotting his next move. In 1977, while still acting on Happy Days, Ron made a deal with producer Roger Corman. He'd star in a film called Eat My Dust in exchange for the chance to direct his own movie. That movie was Grand Theft Auto, and it marked the beginning of Ron Howard's transformation from actor to auteur. What followed was a directing career that most filmmakers only dream about. Splash, in 1984, proved he could handle comedy and heart. Cocoon showed his range. Apollo 13 demonstrated its ability to create tension and drama. And then came A Beautiful Mind in 2001, the film that won him an Academy Award for Best Director and cemented his legacy. But before the Oscars, before the blockbusters, before the respect and admiration of Hollywood's elite, there was Mayberry. And in Mayberry, there was a problem.
Frances Bavier was a trained actress with decades of experience when she joined the Andy Griffith Show. She'd worked on Broadway, appeared in films, and earned her stripes long before television became the dominant medium. In many ways, she represented old-school professionalism, serious, disciplined, and completely committed to her craft. But that commitment came with a cost. Bavier was intensely private, almost to the point of isolation. While other cast members bonded off-camera, sharing meals and inside jokes, Bavier kept her distance. She wasn't interested in the typical Hollywood schmoozing. She showed up, did her job with precision, and left. To some, this came across as dedication. To others, especially a young Ron Howard, it felt cold. Imagine being a child on a television set surrounded by adults who are supposed to be creating a warm, familial atmosphere. Now imagine one of those adults treating you not with cruelty, but with icy indifference. That was Ron's experience with Frances Bavier. She wasn't mean, she didn't yell or berate him, she was just distant, unapproachable. And for a kid trying to do his best work, that emotional chill was hard to shake. Howard Morris, who both acted on the show and directed several episodes, once described working with Bavier as like navigating a landmine. Even simple directorial requests, asking her to adjust her position slightly for a better camera angle, could trigger resistance. She had very specific ideas about how her character should be portrayed, and she didn't appreciate being challenged. Andy Griffith himself experienced this firsthand. Years after the show ended, he tried to mend their fractured relationship. He showed up at her home unannounced, hoping a face-to-face conversation might heal old wounds. Instead, the encounter backfired spectacularly. Bavier, fiercely protective of her privacy, was not happy about the surprise. Rather than bringing them closer, the encounter only reinforced the wall between them. For young Ron Howard, these tensions weren't abstract adult problems. They were part of his daily reality. Every scene with Aunt Bee required him to summon warmth and affection for a character played by someone who gave him virtually nothing in return. It was acting in its purest, most challenging form. And then there was the infamous pickle episode. If you're a fan of the Andy Griffith Show, you know the one. Aunt Bee makes a batch of truly awful homemade pickles, but nobody has the heart to tell her. So Opie and Andy have to choke them down scene after scene, pretending they're delicious. It's a classic comedic setup. Except Ron Howard hated pickles, absolutely despised them. And because television production requires multiple takes from different angles, he had to eat those pickles over and over and over again. Each bite was torture. And sitting across from him, watching with her characteristic sternness, was Frances Bavier, the very person who already made his workdays uncomfortable. It's the kind of memory that sticks with you, not because it was traumatic in a dramatic sense, but because it perfectly encapsulated the disconnect between what audiences saw and what was really happening. On screen, a loving aunt and her devoted nephew. Behind the scenes, a kid choking down food he hated while working with someone who never let him feel at ease. Howard rarely spoke about these experiences publicly during his acting years. He was a professional even as a child, and he understood that airing grievances wasn't good for anyone's career.
But as he matured into adulthood and transitioned into directing, his perspective shifted. He began to see those early experiences not as painful memories to suppress, but as valuable lessons about human complexity. Here's where the story takes a surprisingly poignant turn. Frances Bavier retired from acting in 1972 and moved to Siler City, North Carolina, the same region that inspired the fictional Mayberry. She lived quietly, maintaining the same private lifestyle she'd always preferred. Locals remember her as reserved but kind, a far cry from the difficult reputation she'd earned in Hollywood. As the years passed, Bavier's health deteriorated. She developed serious heart problems and eventually cancer. And somewhere in those final years, facing mortality, something shifted inside her. She picked up the phone and called Andy Griffith. According to Griffith's later recollections, the conversation was stunning in its honesty. After decades of tension, Bavier apologized. She told him, "I'm sorry we didn't get along better. It was my fault." She acknowledged being difficult, recognized Griffith's leadership on the show, and credited him with much of its success. For Griffith, who had tried for years to bridge the gap between them, this admission was profound. It didn't erase the past, but it reframed it. Bavier wasn't making excuses, she was taking responsibility. And in doing so, she gave them both a kind of peace. Frances Bavier passed away in 1989 at the age of 86. She spent her final days in a hospital in North Carolina, the state she'd grown to love. While her official cause of death was never publicly confirmed, most believe it was related to her long-standing heart condition. Andy Griffith would also live to be 86, passing away quietly at his home on Roanoke Island, North Carolina. His family kept the details private, but his death marked an era for fans who'd grown up watching Sheriff Taylor keep the peace in Mayberry. What makes their story so compelling isn't the conflict itself. Hollywood is full of feuds and personality clashes. What's compelling is the resolution. Two people who spent years at odds with each other found the grace to reconcile before it was too late. Bavier's deathbed apology wasn't just about clearing her conscience, it was about acknowledging Griffith's humanity and her own shortcomings. And while Ron Howard wasn't part of that final conversation, the ripples of it likely reached him, because by then he'd learned something crucial about the entertainment industry. The people who challenge you the most often teach you the most valuable lessons.
Before we return to the darker corners of Ron's career, let's talk about something genuinely beautiful, his marriage. In an industry infamous for broken relationships and tabloid drama, Ron and Cheryl Howard stand out like a beacon. On June 7, 2025, they celebrated their 50th wedding anniversary. 50 years! In Hollywood, that's not just rare, it's practically mythical. They met when they were just 16 years old, two California teenagers with big dreams and bigger hearts. Ron has said many times that from the moment he met Cheryl, there was never anyone else. She was it. Their first date was refreshingly normal. Ron picked her up in his mint green Volkswagen Beetle. They went to the movies, grabbed pizza, and talked for hours. No paparazzi, no agents, no industry pressure, just two kids getting to know each other. But here's the twist. When Ron proposed, Cheryl said no. Not because she didn't love him, but because she wasn't ready. She had her own life to build, her own dreams to pursue, and she wasn't going to rush into marriage just because her boyfriend was becoming famous. It took 3 proposals before she finally said yes. Their daughter, Bryce, later described her mother as a force of nature, and it's easy to see why. Cheryl wasn't content to be a Hollywood wife sitting on the sidelines. She was and is a full partner in Ron's life and career. They've raised 4 children together, including daughters Bryce and Paige, who both followed their parents into filmmaking. What's their secret? According to Ron, it's not just love, it's communication, growth, and a willingness to evolve together. He's described marriage as a river ride, complete with calm waters and rough rapids. The key is to keep paddling, keep navigating, keep choosing each other. For their anniversary in 2023, Ron surprised Cheryl by taking her for a drive in that same mint green VW Beetle from their first date. Yes, he still has it, and yes, it still runs. They took the long way home, windows down, reminiscing about 5 decades of shared memories. In a world obsessed with viral moments and fleeting fame, Ron and Cheryl Howard remind us that the most powerful stories are often the quietest ones. Their love isn't loud or dramatic. It's steady, patient, and enduring. And maybe that's exactly why it's lasted. Fast forward to the 21st century, and Ron Howard's reputation as a director was firmly established. But with success came scrutiny. In 2001, A Beautiful Mind swept the Academy Awards, winning Best Picture, Best Director, and Best Adapted Screenplay. The film told the story of John Nash, a brilliant mathematician who struggled with mental illness while making groundbreaking contributions to game theory. Russell Crowe's performance was powerful, the direction was masterful, and audiences left theaters moved by what they'd seen. But not everyone was applauding. Critics quickly pointed out significant omissions from Nash's real life. The film didn't mention his bisexuality. It glossed over the fact that he'd fathered a child outside his marriage and had failed to support that child. These weren't minor details, they were fundamental parts of who Nash was as a person. Howard defended the decision by explaining that he focused on the emotional core of Nash's story, his battle with schizophrenia and his relationship with his wife. Including every biographical detail, he argued, would have diluted that focus. But the controversy highlighted a tension that runs through all biographical filmmaking. Where do you draw the line between artistic license and historical accuracy? When does focusing the narrative become rewriting someone's life? For Howard, the backlash was uncomfortable, but what really bothered him was how the criticism began affecting Nash himself. Suddenly, Nash's personal life was being dissected in public, his private struggles turned into tabloid fodder. That, Howard felt, crossed a line. Then came Hillbilly Elegy. In 2020, Howard directed the film adaptation of J.D. Vance's best-selling memoir about growing up in Appalachia and escaping poverty through education and determination. At the time, Vance wasn't a politician. He was just a writer with a compelling story about resilience and the American dream. Howard approached the project with his characteristic thoughtfulness, focusing on the grit and determination in Vance's upbringing. The film starred Amy Adams and Glenn Close, both delivering powerful performances. But the man Howard tried to understand on screen has since become someone very different in real life. J.D. Vance is now a U.S. Senator and was a vice presidential candidate. And his current political rhetoric, his stances, his statements, his public persona are worlds apart from the vulnerable memoirist Howard once worked with. Howard, who typically avoids political commentary, has made his disappointment clear. He's expressed surprise at Vance's transformation and frustration with the direction his former collaborator has taken. For someone as measured and diplomatic as Ron Howard, that public criticism speaks volumes. It's reminiscent of his experience with Frances Bavier decades earlier, working closely with someone, believing you understand them, only to realize there were depths, or in Vance's case, shifts, you never saw coming.
So what does it all mean? What can we learn from Ron Howard's journey through Hollywood's brightest lights and darkest corners? First, childhood experiences shape us in ways we don't always recognize at the time. Young Ron didn't know that his uncomfortable scenes with Frances Bavier were teaching him about emotional resilience, about maintaining professionalism in difficult circumstances, about the gap between performance and reality. But those lessons stuck with him. When he became a director, he brought a unique perspective to set dynamics. He understood what it felt like to be the vulnerable one, the person trying to deliver a good performance while managing complex interpersonal tensions. That empathy has made him one of the most respected directors in Hollywood, someone actors trust because he's been in their shoes. Second, that people are complicated.
Frances Bavier wasn't a villain. She was a talented, dedicated actress who struggled with the demands of fame and the emotional labor of playing a warm, nurturing character when that wasn't her natural temperament. Her deathbed reconciliation with Andy Griffith proves she was capable of self-reflection and growth. Third, that the stories we tell matter, and so do the ones we leave out. Whether it's a biographical film about John Nash or a memoir adaptation about J.D. Vance, filmmakers make countless decisions about what to include and what to omit. Those choices have consequences. And finally, that longevity in Hollywood requires more than talent. Ron Howard has survived and thrived for 7 decades, not just because he's a skilled actor and director, but because he's maintained his integrity. He's been willing to evolve, to listen, to learn from his mistakes. He's built a stable personal life that grounds him when the industry gets chaotic, and he's never forgotten where he came from. From the pickles he had to choke down in Mayberry to the Oscar he hoisted above his head at the Academy Awards, Ron Howard's career is a masterclass in resilience, growth, and the power of choosing your battles wisely. The Andy Griffith Show gave us 8 seasons of warmth, humor, and small-town charm. It created characters we still love decades later, and a fictional place, Mayberry, that feels more real than many actual towns. But behind that idealized world were real people with real tensions, real struggles, and real complexity. Ron Howard learned early that the gap between what audiences see and what actually happens can be vast. He learned that difficult coworkers can still teach you valuable lessons. He learned that talent and kindness don't always come packaged together. And perhaps most importantly, he learned that growth is possible. Frances Bavier's final apology to Andy Griffith proves that even the most stubborn hearts can soften, even the deepest rifts can be bridged, if we're willing to be honest with ourselves and each other. Today, Ron Howard stands as one of Hollywood's most accomplished figures. He's directed some of the most memorable films of the past 4 decades. He's built a marriage that's lasted half a century. He's raised a family, and he's done it all while maintaining the dignity and professionalism that defined him even as a red-headed kid on a television set. The castmate he couldn't stand, she's been gone for over 3 decades now, but the lessons she taught him about resilience, about complexity, about the importance of separating performance from personality, those lessons are still paying dividends. So here's my question for you. What's your favorite Ron Howard film? Is it the heartwarming magic of Splash, the nail-biting tension of Apollo 13, the emotional depth of A Beautiful Mind? Or maybe you're old school and still think of him as Opie Taylor or Richie Cunningham. Drop your answer in the comments below. I genuinely want to know which of his works resonates most with you and why. And if this video gave you a new perspective on the Andy Griffith Show or Ron Howard's incredible career, do me a favor. Hit that like button, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and click the bell so you never miss our deep dives into Hollywood's most fascinating stories. Because here's the truth, the entertainment we love is always more complex than it appears on the surface. Every beloved show, every iconic film, every celebrated career has layers upon layers of human drama, struggle, and triumph hiding just behind the curtain. And we're here to pull that curtain back. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one where we're diving into another story Hollywood tried to keep quiet. Trust me, you won't want to miss it.